More medications, less health. Something's broken. Traditional medicine manages symptoms, but true healing addresses root cause. I'm Josh Rimany, pharmacist turned healer. At Beyond the Pills, we merge ancient wisdom with modern-day science to inspire you through stories of transformation, practical trainings, and holistic healing. Join me and other practitioners as we guide you towards vibrant health, body, mind, and spirit, and move beyond symptom management into true healing. Hello, and welcome back to Beyond the Pills. This is a space where we explore healing through body, mind, and spirit and soulful depth. I'm your host, Josh Rimany, pharmacist turned healer. Today's episode is a deeply personal and powerful one for me because we're welcoming a colleague, a guide, a kindred spirit, Kenn. He's the author of Post-Tribal Shamanism. Kenn has devoted over 30 years to honoring the soul's calling to healing, studying all forms of shamanism, crafting a living, modern shamanic path that thrives outside of the tribal frameworks. In a world of disconnected from our ancestors, earth, spirit, Kenn has helped us heal what he calls the invisible world. The soul hunger, fueling addiction, grief, and disconnection. His work is not about returning to the past, but evolving shamanic practice through our post-tribal lives. He's based in Cincinnati, where my wife is from, and Kenn has maintained a full-time shamanic and healing practice since in the 1989. He's leading transformative workshops, author of many books, which I've read, and cultivating a revival of animism and spiritual integrity in the West. Today, we're going to explore what post-tribal shamanism truly means, how it differs from the traditional models, and how Kenn is weaving soul, ritual, constellation, and healing into our modern landscapes and even in business. Let's lean in and begin. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. This is a long time coming, and at the same time, perfect timing. We've connected on many levels over the years. We share friends, and I've gone on my own journey of studying energy medicine in most of the places of indigenous shamanism. So let's get started. Can you just share with us, like, what first called you into shamanic service and how your journey has evolved into this post-tribal way?
Okay, well, to begin with, I would say that it began long before I can put a name to it, before I did put a name to it. The nature of shamanism is that we are called by spirit, and that's something that happens before we're born. You know, in Mongolia, they talk about how, before people are born, when you look up at the tree of life, all the people who are going to be born as regular human beings are over on one big branch, and then the shamans have their own branch. Now, whatever that means, and whether that has any impact on us here in the West, I'm not really sure. But it does seem to point to the fact that the shamans kind of tap you before you actually are born into this body. So grandfather, which is what I call my first own god, I'm sure has been with me since before I was born. And I can go into that a lot more as we go forward. But just to answer your question, first thing I want to do is say, when people come to me and say, well, what if I'm not interested in becoming a shaman, or I haven't been called by spirits to become a shaman? Why would I want to take these workshops? Why would I want to read your book? I said, well, if you have any interest in expanding your sense of reality, your sense of what is, if you have any interest in connecting with the myriad spirits that surround you and having a good, positive, informative, and supportive experience and relationship with the world around you, these are all good reasons. It used to be that most people who went through my series of workshops had not been called to be shamans. And so they became really good animists. And animism is simply that strange idea that everything, absolutely everything, including, your coffee cup or whatever, they're all alive and imbued with spirit. So when we wake up in the morning, we have the opportunity to engage with an entire world full of spirits and life. And a lot of what I do in my workshops and in my work with clients is helping people to recognize that, engage with that, and be supported by that relationship. But you asked, what is my background with it? Well, I didn't realize it was called shamanism for quite some time. It wasn't until I would say probably the early 80s when I was reading a book by Mircea Eliade called Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. And I had just been exploring for years. And I was getting ready to start art school and was still looking for something that made sense, because all I knew is that when I would try to meditate, I would sit there and almost inevitably, as soon as I got into a deep meditative trance, it felt like this other entity popped up alongside me. It felt like an old guy with long gray hair and kind of a snarky smile. And it took me the longest time to recognize that that wasn't just a figment of my imagination, that was actually an entity in its own right. And that is the sort of thing that is very difficult for us Westerners to really grasp.
For sure. Yeah. So go through that a little bit in your mind, because as you're building that up, you're doubting yourself a little bit. It's a figment of our imagination. But I think a lot of people think I would say at this point, our listeners are pretty attuned to things like consciousness and the grid and quantum. But in your own words, express this so people can see it, because this is what you do. This is how you, This is why I love reading your books and talking with you, is you explain it in this new way, in this modern-ish way.
Well, one of the things I can say is, first of all, I'm working on my third book on shamanism. And one of the things that I'm pointing to are all the various myriad obstacles that those of us who are called to this path by the spirits in the West have to deal with. And one of the biggest is the Western mental perspective on materialism. That everything is defined by your physical senses. And our physical senses are great. And it's not to diminish them in any way. But when I first realized that the teachings that I was getting from this long-haired guy who was sitting next to me when I meditated weren't just for me, but let me preface this by saying, by the time I was getting ready to go to art school in the early 80s, I was already deeply depressed, anxious, had undiagnosed PTSD. I was a mess. I'd had a very interesting childhood. And this is often the case with people who are called to shamanism, but we'll get to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely want to get to that.
So one of the first things that happened was I had a couple of people who said, well, Kenn, we notice that you're not as difficult to be around lately. What are you doing? And I said, oh, well, there's this stuff that I've been doing when I'm meditating. He said, well, can you show us? I thought, I don't know. Let's try. And one of the first things, first of all, the first teaching that I ever received from grandfather, from Shespa, from my first on God, was very simply, there is only one center. It just happens to be everywhere, which completely blew my mind once I let it in. It still kind of blows my mind. It is so fundamental a teaching that now I see it all over the place. Most spiritual traditions eventually get around to saying that. That was the first thing that I remember receiving from grandfather. One of his next teachings, though, was this idea that, well, you can go into this other realm. I didn't call it the spirit world yet because I didn't have a reference for that. But he talked about opening my inner doorways and going through into this other realm. And so when these people started asking, I had a couple of friends who were asking about this. And I said, okay, so follow this. And I led them, first of all, through their heart center into pure consciousness, essentially, into the spiritual body. And from there, had them create a mirror and then go through, send a beam of light through that mirror into their reflection, follow that through. And there's this weird sensation you get when you're actually going through the mirror of kind of turning inside out and backwards at the same time. And then you're continuing on into your reflection. And once you emerge in your reflection, then you can go through the heart-centered doorway there. And when you expand outward, you're in your shamanic body. You are in the area in the spirit realm that's right next to the world tree. So I led people through this, and one of them said, well, what's with the tree? I was like, whoa, you sense the tree? You see, they saw the tree, which I never did. I'm not very visual when it comes to the spirit realm, but they were aware of the tree. And that was my first recognition that, so this isn't just me. This is something that is actually to be used by any human being. And that was a real awakening. But the interesting thing was that as soon as people started experiencing that sense of, oh, my consciousness is not only resident in my body, and I have another way besides dreaming to experience things outside it. And once they realized that this wasn't creative visualization, and don't get me wrong, I love creative visualization. It's a wonderful and powerful tool, but it happens in here, right? And well, early on, I discovered that the best way to get it across to people what this was relative to creative visualization was, first of all, have them, before they do anything else, just visualize a really big tree, big oak tree. Now move that 6 feet to the left. No problem. Okay. And we go through those inner doorways into lodge, that space around the world tree. Introduce them to the world tree. So, okay. Now move that 6 feet to the left. So far, after 45 years of practice, nobody, including me, has been able to budge the world tree. Doesn't happen. The point is that world tree is there. It was there before you were born. It will be there long after you're gone. And so what we're doing is actually experiencing something that's really there. People will often ask the question, well, yes, but is what I'm experiencing there real? And what they're really saying is it just like this? Is it the same kind of experience that I have in my physical body? No, of course not. You're not in your physical body. You're in your shamanic body. You're in an alternate vehicle for consciousness. If instead you ask the question, do these experiences have a profound and lasting impact on my life? Yes, absolutely. Without that. And so this has become the foundation of what we do in post-tribal shamanism. We help people come to the kind of awakening, the kind of radical egoic initiations that arise from this kind of experience. So that sense of the ego has of, oh, wait a minute, I'm outside of my body and I'm not dreaming and I'm not just imagining something. I'm going to have to expand my whole sense of awareness, right? I'm going to have to expand my sense of what is real. And that can be, for some people, really devastating, and for some people, really exciting. So it really depends on how you are as an individual, how you respond to that. One of the other really big things is we have this thing in shamanism called wind horse. And from that, we build what we call medicine body, which is cultivating enough of that Jing Shen, that wind horse energy that allows you to support your consciousness beyond your physical body, outside of your head. And you expand this out into the space around your body, and then you extend your consciousness into that field. And all of a sudden you have to deal with, your ego has to deal with being beyond the parameters that it had defined as self. And once again, this is, it has a tendency to bring about some real awakening.
Yeah, I think that's where I think we are in the stage of our existence as humanity, right? Is like where this awakening is starting to envelop. And I'm starting to hear it from different angles and different places. And here's a great example of, the spirit, you downloading or getting this information at an early age of this, like the concept of like the part is the whole and the oneness, right? Like the ascending out of the body and into, you can always put the science and the ancient to these conversations. This is why we have them in different ways, because it's, some people need to get it from like quantum physics, and some people need to get it from this realm of spirit, and it's all energy. It's this energy body that we're talking about, the shamanic body. And I love how you eloquently talk about, the shaman sort of having one foot in both places at the same time, right? That's kind of what I experienced in different healing indigenous practices when I've been looking at shamans. I would notice them effortlessly through their work and through their, whether they were using plant medicines or other energy modalities, but I would notice them in that. Of course, they've done all this initiation and an apprenticeship through this, and I want to talk about that too. But it was this effortless dance in both, and it was just, I could see it, I could feel it, and I've been so enamored with that from just in this awe that we have. I told you on our one of our connection calls the other week is like, I just turned 50, and it's like this whole new world has been open to me. It's like, oh, I feel like I have like maybe a third to a half of what I've learned, right? Because I've studied all the stuff in this body and then in this mind, right? Neuroscience, meditation, functional medicine, traditional pharmacy, like, and this whole realm of energy medicine, which called me, about 8-10 years ago. It's like, oh, I feel like I need to learn more about this thing called I called it energy medicine at the time, right? Which brought me to some of our mutual friends and you, and it just started building. And then I want you to talk a little bit about how you aligned with spirit, but also how spirit aligned with your path as you kept moving through this process. Because I feel like that's sort of the keys to these things.
Well, that's a great way to start. I would say that the biggest impact that spirit has had has been in defining what I can do and what I can't do. And what I mean by that is that grandfather had some very specific ideas of what he wants me to do and some very clear ideas of what he doesn't want me to do. And he became very clear early on that he did not want me to become a traditional therapist or a bartender or a teacher or any of that. And I mean, I was actually an art director for a while when I was in my early 20s, and that did not work. And I had to drop that. And the best indication of this, though, was when I was in my early 30s and I was still struggling with it. I still was trying to make sense of the fact that what I was doing was called shamanism and that I was actually a shaman. I was really struggling with that. And I was trying to come up with a runaround with grandfather's idea that I couldn't be a traditional therapist. I said, okay, so how about if I design my own practice and my own university degree, and I get this degree, and that allows me to be certified as a counselor or something. So I went up to Antioch College and got a chance to sit with the curriculum advisor and all that. I had an appointment set up to go and get that started. And I was teaching in Boston at the time. And I flew in, landed in Dayton, grabbed my car. I had this lovely old 1991 Nissan Maxima that I was thrilled with. I should never have had a Nissan Maxima. More speeding tickets than I had.
I remember those.
Very effective muscle cars. So I drove out of the airfield, the airport, and I'm driving toward Antioch. And it's a beautiful, sunny summer day, and the sun is shining. It's cloudless sky. It's calm. It's serene. I'm zooming along. We go through a little valley. All of a sudden, I'm hitting this big puddle of water, and my car got hit by a weird gust of wind, came out of nowhere. And suddenly it spun around and I'm going backwards about 95 miles an hour, Nissan Maxima. And I had this momentary choice to say, okay, I see a big red pickup truck on one side and the median on the other. I better hit the median. And so next thing I knew, everything went up in the air and then went down and bounced a few things. And the engine was off, but the radio was still playing. The window was shattered. The windshield was shattered. I walked away from it. My car was totaled. Poor car. I only had one small injury. I had one little scratch right there. Subtle, I know, but I got the point. Sometimes grandfather's like, I told you again, and you kept going, slap.
I've had that conversation many times with people in these spaces where, you could call grandfather, universe, spirit, whatever you identify with, but it's like, when you say, like, that was my question, like, do you get the transmissions verbally or visually, or in these ways, like, they're not really breadcrumbs anymore. They're like, here's the breadcrumb. But it's like, it's almost that karmic loop, right? Where it's like, it kind of gets you to the place where it literally kicks you in the ass and says, all right, I told you twice. Yeah. Each time I'm just going to get a little bit more. It's like, yeah, you literally told you to turn around.
Yes.
Right. And so when you say, like, spirit told me, it's like, that is when you're attuned to the signs,
right?
You see exactly how it unfolds for you, because there's this interweaving of where you see and what it sees with you, right?
Right. And wouldn't it be lovely if they actually spoke in words that we could understand? Unfortunately, that has not been the case for me. I know it is for some. For me, it's like, well, that's kind of vague. And grandfather's like, no, it's not. And you know it's not. You're just using that as an excuse to try and do what you wanted to do anyway. If you keep going,
Right.
you're going to run into this. So I learned that lesson finally. But this brings up the notion of, once again, it is really difficult being called to do this kind of work in the West. You would think that after 40 plus years of actively doing this, knowing that this is what I was doing, that I would get it through my thick skull that it's real. And I know that. And yet I keep getting these experiences that show me just how much more real it is than I was allowing it. If that
Well, I
makes
think
sense.
yeah. Well, you think about near death experiences, or if you study like some deep meditative experiences in different realms, or even plant medicines, it's like there's a space where people say it's more real than real.
Yes.
Right. And you, there's a knowing that, and you and I have talked about this, is because you lead people through experiential learning. I've learned this over my tenure just recently, over the last few years, is to teach through experience, because that's how you learn this viscerally, right? And so we're talking about moving from here to here, from the mind to the heart, like that intuitive space, like where there's this knowing, where your soul is connecting to your higher self, right? We're talking about these kind of concepts in a way.
In a weird way, it's more embodied.
Yeah.
I know it's going beyond the physical, but the physical mind has a lot to offer. And there's a whole lot that we can learn that, it's like the difference between somebody telling you what coffee is. And maybe you read a paper on what coffee beans are and how it's processed into coffee. That is a completely different experience than having somebody drop a cup of hot coffee on your lap or drinking a cup of hot coffee. That is very experiential. There's no way that your mind has any way to deny the truth of that experience.
Well, I think it's also in that space where I think this is where we're like in the next 10 to 20 years is what I'm sensing and feeling, is where we have this beautiful divine body where we have these five senses and we can sense the world around us in this 3D realm, in this body, right? We're here to experience all of it. And that's a uniqueness, I think, to humanity. And I like that the "and" word has come up with me and has the deepest meaning I've ever had in my life. And we also have this connection with source energy, with oneness, with this energetic space that you've been talking about, that we've been talking about in different realms, in different ways, that we also get to experience. That is that real more than real, because it's, if we're 0.00001 of existence in this like physical realm, everything else is so much more magnanimous. Like, and the connectedness we have with spirit, with the quantum, with the world, with the universe, it's all interconnected. That's why wouldn't it be nice if we could just get a download with somebody talking to me? Not everybody gets that, but there's so much that's why we call it fractal information, because there's so much attached to it that our let's call it our puny little brains just can't decipher it all at the same time. And it comes in these ways where, if you choose to believe this, because I choose to believe this and I believe it for real because I've experienced it so many times. One of my favorite words is awe. Because awe means I'm seeing in the connectedness of my existence with the whole. And I have a synchronicity journal now. I don't have a gratitude journal. I have a synchronicity journal because I love the synchronicities that just fall into place when they're supposed to. I want to talk a little bit about the concept that you've like coined or introduced, post-tribal shamanism,
Yes.
because I've read your book more than once. I've given it out to many of my seeker finder friends because it's just such
Thank
and it
you.
was small, easy read, but it's so impactful. How does it differ from this traditional tribal master?
Okay, great question. How does post-tribal shamanism differ from traditional indigenous shamanism? Okay. To respond to that, I have to actually back up a little bit and say,
Please do.
there is actually a special group of anthropologists these days that are called shamanologists. So these are anthropologists who specifically study indigenous shamanism. And one of the things that they've done over the past 20 years or so is go and speak with these indigenous people who are still practicing traditional shamanism, because not everybody got stopped.
Right.
Most, but not everybody. And what they discovered is that all of these shamanic groups that are actually practicing what they consider shamanism have the same elements. And what they discover is that all of them agree that a shaman is, number one, chosen by the spirits. Number two, that they're chosen to be in service to both the human community and the spirits. That they are in service by going into intentional trance states in order to move into the spirit realm, to connect with spirits, and to bring back information and to cause changes that are not accessible through more ordinary means. Well, that is a long list of definitions to make one definition out of. But that's the way that looks. And what's interesting is when you just look at that, that is exactly the definition of what post-tribal shamanism does. Where it differs is that the teachings that Grandfather Shespa has transmitted to me and through me to my apprentices and to my students, to those people who read the book, those teachings are specifically aimed at people in our Western culture. Okay, because we have that invisible wound. We have that sense of disconnection from so many parts of the human experience that our ancestors were very connected with. Okay, now we can't go backward, and so we have to go forward.
Right.
So the question is, how can we take this forward in a way where this form of shamanism can be supportive and productive? And it wasn't until the mid 80s that I coined that term post-tribal shamanism, because I knew that I wanted to honor those people who were still practicing in indigenous shamanism. I did not want to step on their toes. I had already discovered that most of what Grandfather Shespa had passed on to me, most of those teachings also showed up in one form or another, something very like them, in some of these indigenous practices. Okay. Back in the early 80s, where I was still struggling with, but can I call myself a shaman? I mean, after all, I'm white and I'm growing up here in the West. Do I have a right? And I was teaching about shamanism because I had studied a lot. And I was at a conference up in Detroit, of all places. And they were having a few of us who were teaching about shamanism. And there was one in particular I saw. They had a shaman, a tribal shaman of the Buryat Siberian tribal tradition. And I was thrilled. I was so excited. And then I realized, and unfortunately, they placed her right at the same time as my workshops. So as soon as I got done with my workshop, I head out, I turned down the hall and headed toward where I think her boss was. And all of a sudden I see in front of me this large woman. She's like 6'2", beautiful ethnic tribal dress, headdress, all this. And I look up and says, "Oh, you must be Sarah Garrel," which was her name. And she said, "You must be Kenn Day," because I have my fedora on, and everyone knows shamans wear fedoras. So we wound up going back into a classroom that was unused for a while and spent at least like two, maybe 3 hours just getting to know one another, and what my dear friend Ayla used to call swapping stupid shaman tricks. Just bringing out little bits and pieces, sharing.
Right.
They go, "Well, you do it this way, we do it this way." Interesting. And when we got done, what really hit me was she said, "Well, it's so nice to meet another shaman here." I was worried because, I'd met a few people and they were talking about shamanism, but I said, "Well, what leads you to believe that I'm a shaman?" And she said, "Well, when you call them, the spirits come." Okay, thank you. And to this day, even if someone doesn't adhere to all of the definitions that the shamanologists would like to use, I'm still going to give them the benefit of the doubt if when they call, the spirits answer. Because that's really what we're doing. We're working with spirits. And I hate to say it, but a lot of the people out there in the West who are considering themselves and selling themselves as shamans are basically doing creative visualization and imaginary work because they haven't had that connection to move into the realm of the spirits. And I'm hoping that that is really going to grow. I know that I'm not alone in this. I know that there are other people out there. And I love that. I love that this is growing. And grandfather really wants to have me plant the seed of his lineage. This is not my lineage. I'm not smart enough to make all this stuff up. It works entirely too well. And if it didn't work, I wouldn't be passing it on. It was one thing I figured out a long time ago was road test it first. If it works on me, then try it on a few friends. If it works on them, try it on some clients. If it works on them, maybe add it to your teaching.
I love that. I've always had that principle. This do you first, right? The do you first principle for wellness, health, and healing. And so I love that. And I've said that more often than not over this past year to people where I just simply say, I can't make this stuff up. I can't make it up. This is what's happening. It's one of those things where, and I love that you brought that up because I think the word like selling themselves as shamans is, to me, energetically mismatching. I don't like that. And I like that you've gone into this space where, and I love the definition from a shaman because I've learned to love and experience the brevity and levity of shamanism. It's not all this, like they have fun, they laugh, and they do, and there's this simplicity that's also complex, right? Why do you call me a shaman? Well, when you call, the spirits come. Like it's very simple, but at the same time, we could probably have a whole podcast and probably a whole book on what that means.
Yes.
Right. And so, when you know, but at the same time, I really like that you brought it up and you explained it in that way. My probing, like deeping diver question is, how does one know whether they're visually, visualization versus spirit actually calling? Like, where is that? Because my analytical goes in here, right? This, right? I know it's here. I know it's the knowing, but like
my left brain analytical that saved me, and part of my invisible wounds is like always wanting to know how, but it's not like that, is it?
So how do you discern? How do you discern the difference? Okay. So this is the foundation of one of the primary meditative techniques that I use, which I'm pretty sure I got from grandfather, but it shows up all over the world. And essentially, it's the ability to drop back into observer mind. If you look at the mind as having two functions, one is to observe and one is to think. And if you focus on the observer mind and observe the thinking mind, the thoughts just fall away. I know it sounds weird, but it works. So when I'm meditating, one of the first things I do is drop back into observer mind, and I observe the thoughts that arise. And then I trace those thoughts back to their source. And that source is emptiness. But that emptiness is filled with awareness.
Right.
And that awareness and that emptiness are in union. And when you observe that, you realize, oh, this isn't going anywhere. This isn't falling away. This isn't dissolving like my thoughts do. When I observe this union, this luminous field of awareness, not only does it remain, but the stillness, the silence, the spaciousness of this place, the bliss of this place remains. Now, I can still be generating a thought every once in a while. And when I look at that, that falls away, that dissolves. And so I know there's a difference. And I can take this into the spirit realm with me. When I'm in shamanic body and I go and I'm standing there in front of the world tree and I'm being really visual that day. And for some reason, the spirit world has gifted me with this vision of the world tree being this 400-year-old oak tree. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And I drop back into observer mind, and that 400-year-old oak tree just melts away. But the world tree is still there.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's this whole the thought that just came to me is like the nature versus nurture. Like there's parts of this that take practice because we have been trained or programmed over the last couple of 100 years, especially like to not be attuned to this, to be in like we've gone from the age of intelligence to now moving back here. But like you said, we're not going back, we're moving forward. We're using this, but fusing more to that. And so I think it's like there's this practice and there's also guiding people through the awareness process, the awakening process of that. Right. So that's kind of how I see it, at least.
Me too.
Which is why I still feel like learning, and which brings me to some of the, and I also believe, we both believe that like this is now something for the Western world to be able to experience and learn.
Yes.
And this is why, and the Western world, which is infusing a lot into these indigenous tribes and practices, is also falling away. Like, I learned from the Shipibo healers in Peru, and they were talking like, my daughter doesn't want to continue this lineage. She'd been chosen, but they've choosing the West world in different ways, so there's no wrong or right. But I've also heard that like from different practices and shamanic trainings that I've done is like, the indigenous and the people that are teaching us now, the white world, the Western world, whatever, is they also know that we're ready. Like this is part of that imparting of the wisdom keepers moving forward, right?
Well, they know it's essential for us to do this. We're getting to the point where if we don't wake up and learn this, we could destroy ourselves.
Agreed. We already know that we're destroying ourselves. So right. It's like the definition of insanity times a million. It's like we're right. doing the same things. We're ruining our planet. We're right. And I love that you brought that into the ancestral and animistic body revival, because it is that connectedness that we're needing to learn. We're needing to be, because we all have it inside us to connect.
Absolutely.
Right? This is not like a thing where and no human can get there. Now,
Right.
not all humans are born or destined to be shamans, to be in both worlds, right? But we can experience the connectedness of this source energy.
Well, and one of my Mongolian shaman friends, tribal shaman of the Dark-Hauled people, Amina, has coined her own term for people who practice shamanism, who aren't called to become shamans, but they put with their family, with their friends, and so on. She calls them shamanists. I think that's great. You know, basically they're animists plus. And I think that a lot of the people who do the training with me wind up being shamanists. And I think that's fine. A lot of them become like life coaches or some other thing that they can use the techniques of shamanism, the teachings of shamanism, to expand their awareness and their connections and deepen those connections for the benefit of their clients.
Which I think that becomes, again, that sort of part is the whole, right? When we serve, this is why I love working with high impact people, because if I can help heal them and impact them in some way, then that ripple effect becomes how we raise humanity, how we raise consciousness, and how we get out of this pickle.
Absolutely.
Because, we're in that space. We talked about the invisible wound, a little bit of the animistic revival, honoring ancestors. How is this manifest in like your daily life and in the workshops that you're teaching? I don't know if people understand what that word really means, but I think we talked a lot about connection, right? A lot about, everything has energy, it has life.
Right.
And we just think this body and us, we're special, right?
Well, it really helps if you have the basic, one of grandfather's teachings, but it shows up in most, if not all, tribal cultures as well. And that is that we human beings have not one, but 3 souls. One of these souls is what we call the ancestral soul. And it enters the womb at just, at the first breath, not even first breath, I'm sorry. When the baby is conceived, this enters the fetus and kind of comes in and out. And this contains all of your ancestors going all the way back in time. And then within that communal soup of the ancestors, it also has all the individuals that are still alive and the ones that are recently passed. So this is where you're born from. You begin as a communal entity. Then with the first breath you take outside of your mother's womb, right after birth, that first breath you take in, you bring in what we call the celestial soul. And the celestial soul is that strange part of yourself that has had many lifetimes before this and will go on to have many lifetimes after this. And when those
you would call incarnation?
Yes.
You think? Okay.
Incarnation, reincarnation, rebirth, all that.
Yeah.
When these two come together within us, they create the vital soul, which is who we are in this lifetime. Okay. So we all have this predetermined sense of being a communal self. And when we emerge into this lifetime, one of the first things that we do to our kids is try to train them to forget that. There's no such thing. You are an individual. You need to grow up and be a strong, independent individual, rugged and individualist. And unfortunately, that is completely at odds with that deep, profound hunger for a larger sense of self that contains everybody. And we get a little bit of that in more traditional cultures where the family is still really important. But here in the West, especially in this, our white bread society here, we don't have that much at all. So one of the first things that happens when I'm teaching my workshops and we sit there around the mesa and everyone puts their tokens in to connect in with the one center and the world tree. And then we do a meditative experience where we move through that one center and expand into the egregore, that shared soul where we're all one. And the vast majority of students experiencing that for the first time are like, wow, I feel so loved, so accepted, so welcomed. And everyone feels that. I have never had anyone who has kind of put their toe in that pool and felt anything but loving, accepting, welcoming, belonging. Well, that's something we're all hungry for. We're all thirsty for. In fact, so many of our societal difficulties, from making bad choices in our lives, choosing drugs or alcohol or bad relationships, all these are because we have this deep hunger that is not being met. And so when we have a way to meet that, it transforms things. I have seen numerous people who came in and they consider themselves addicts or alcoholics. We start working on that soul level connection. They start doing the work. They start connecting with the ancestral soul. They start making regular daily gifts to the ancestors, honoring the ancestors, thanking the ancestors. Next thing you know, they've forgotten that they were an alcoholic. It's not an issue anymore because they are getting what they were trying to fill with alcohol. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it also speaks to this, when we connect on the soul level, this maybe unconscious level of something bigger than me, right? These beings sort of dissipate naturally because the energetics changes. And so, and I love that because I think, we've talked a lot about in different ways, the traumas and the addictions and why they're underneath that. It's not the fact that it's just an addictive chemical and you're just going to use it and you're destroying yourself. It's like there's something underneath seeking, right? That's seeking. And then once you feed that and you gift it what it's not supposed to, but like what it naturally is.
Right.
Like you said, it's like they just forget. It just falls away. It's not this body figuring like detox and just go away, because that's why people relapse all the time, because they don't actually get they get cleaned up, but they don't get what they're seeking, right?
Well, they don't. Well, we have this idea that there's something wrong with them for wanting this thing. There's nothing wrong.
We all want it, right? We all need it.
Right.
It's an innate side of us.
Taking this to the next step. One of my recent graduated apprentices, I actually have people who have gone all the way through the apprenticeship now and have graduated and become shamans in their own right. And this fellow is a lawyer, and he is one of my biggest provocateurs. He keeps pushing me to go further and stronger and deeper, and it's great. And he has encouraged me to start a company with him we call Alembic. And it is a company that is focused on bringing this kind of work, and specifically organizational constellation work, we'll talk about that in a moment, to organizations, companies, nonprofit organizations, corporations, wherever. Anywhere there is a group that can be supported and assisted and transformed and healed by this deeper realization of the soul level awareness of the organization, this is tremendously effective. And where this comes from, some of you may have heard of family constellation work, systemic constellation work, a guy named Bert Hellinger. Way back in 2001, I was leading a group of my lovely students and my wife over in Cornwall, England. And a dear friend from over in Germany came to visit. And she said, "Oh, Ken, you're going to love this. I discovered this new exercise, this new process that's going on called constellation work." And I said, "Well, let's see." And so that evening, she set up a constellation. She had everyone sitting in the seminar room, and she had one person say, "Okay, you're going to be the client. Now we're going to interview you. We're going to figure out what's going on with you. Okay, now we're going to have you choose someone in the group to represent yourself, someone to represent your mother, someone to represent your father." So we did this. And then that person, that client, got up and just through sheer intuition placed each one of the representations where they felt they belonged in the room. And they sit down and watch, simply observe. And she got up and walked around and would interview each of the representatives and find out what was going on. And all these things became clear. And then she could encourage, invite the soul to move these things around and address the issues and move forward. And I'm observing this. I'm completely blown away. It's my God, this is group shamanism. This field that they're generating, that's the family soul. That's the ancestral soul. It's so clear. It's right there. And this gives people an opportunity to actually see with their eyes, with their physical senses, what's going on unconsciously at a soul level within themselves. Organizational constellation uses the fact that we humans, even when we don't realize it, even when we're completely unaware of it, we always join together and create these group souls. So when we work someplace, when we have a job, we have a group soul with those people that we're working with. Mm-hmm. And that group soul has its own dynamic. And if things aren't going well, it's probably because that dynamic has something counterproductive going on. And if we do a constellation and bring that into clarity, we can address it. We can shift that. I had one of my first organizational constellations years ago after Patricia and I did 2 years of training with Heinz Stark, where there was this small company that was right across the river in Kentucky. And they had great business for like 60 years. And then a new company came in and bought them. And everyone who had been, the family basically died out. It was a family-owned company. The family died off. And so this new group came in and purchased them, and they changed a whole lot of things. And all of a sudden, their market share just collapsed, and they started losing people working for them, and they couldn't figure it out. And they brought us in as a last resort, quite frankly, because we've tried everything else. It hasn't worked. So let's try this. And there was no real expectation. But what became very clear fairly early on was that the group soul of the company was really unhappy with the new owners. And I kept trying to find out what is it they did that triggered this. And I said, okay, so what have you done with the actual space? And they said, well, when we came in, it was, the last time it was painted was like in 1964, and it still had a big portrait of the founder sitting on the wall. I said, and where is that portrait of the founder now? I don't know. Turns out it was in the basement behind the furnace with a bunch of other paintings. Brought that back up, renovated it, put it back on the wall. Within 3 weeks, their market share had started coming back up. Sometimes it's that simple. The company's group soul was thrilled to have, Papa back on the wall. And it made all the difference. And that was palpable to the people who were working there. So my hope is that we've just started this company and we're just looking for a beginning. But if anyone's interested, please get in touch.
I love that. And I think there's such value in it because we talked a little bit earlier on that subject, was like, it goes beyond like company culture, right? There's this imprint, this lineage. We can talk about ancestral lineage through these different bodies now, these different soul prints. And we've called our pharmacy, which has many evolutions through it, like we call it a pharmaly, but it's really a soul print, right? It's that soul that we have because the part is the whole, right? All these things happen, and it's not just the people that come in and change things and people don't like it. It's like there's an energetics underneath that. And I think uncovering that in today, it's like, what a beautiful adaptation of family constellation work or whatever those things are, because applying it to real life business is viable. It's real. It's something that works,
Well, it brings it actively into this Western culture that we have today. It says, you want to know how to apply this? Well, here's one way to apply it. It doesn't get much more modern Western than a corporation.
Right. It makes it more easily like not adaptable, but like easily like, usable in this space, because you can tie how we see or feel or do things in this world to that energetics.
Yeah.
Which is where I think it's going to have a lot of power and a lot of impact. So I'm really excited for that. We'll get to how people can get a hold of you and all that good stuff, but I know you're working on a new book.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I think you're taking your experience and moving it into that next realm of like, going from thinking to doing to becoming, right? This thing. So talk to us a little bit about the new book.
Okay. Well, the new book is entitled Planting the Seed of Shamanism in the West. And it is, grandfather wants me to found his lineage here. One of the biggest difference between post-tribal shamanism and indigenous shamanism is indigenous shamanism always is a lineage-based system. You can trace it back to, okay, well, my own God was one of my ancestors and my teacher was, the tribal shaman before me. And it's always clear. And when grandfather Shespa started teaching me, all of a sudden my lineage is invisible. It's still there. It goes back to grandfather in Pure Land, but I can't talk to anybody and say, well, yeah, you can do a Google on, Google this name and you're going to come up with all kinds of writings. No, it's something that has to begin here in the West. And it's a big job, and I'm still, even as I'm writing this book, I'm discovering, wow, I still am so Western in my thinking in some ways. And it's still such a growth-oriented process. I'm constantly expanding. At 66 years old, I am learning more now on a daily basis than I was at 30. And that's both exciting and a little bit daunting. Right? A few years ago, I got Amina invited me over to do a little shamanic pilgrimage in Mongolia, and I thought, that's so sweet, and no way, there's no way I can free myself up from my practice and my clients and my home. I have a family, I have a wonderful wife and daughter. And so I told my wife this. I said, yeah, Amina wants me to go over and, got this fellow in Wales who's really trying to get me to go. And she said, well, why wouldn't you? Well, there just went my best excuse not to. So I wound up going. And
I remember that.
yeah, that was quite a trip. But even there, I mean, when we're driving, we're taking this big old bus across the sands of Western Mongolia, and we stop in this town called Khod, and we're doing a ritual to honor the Savdag, the spirit of a mountain, the guardian spirit of a mountain. And this whole ritual, and I got to feed the on god who was manifesting within the shaman some water or something. I think it was probably vodka in a wooden bowl. And then after the ritual is all done, he comes up and says, Kenn, my spirits told me to tell you that you have two on gods. And I hadn't told Amina that I had two on gods. We had only talked about Shespa. And so it was another one of those, this is real in a deeper and more substantial way than you can imagine. Deal with it. And so I'm still dealing with it.
Well, and it's that beautiful, like, again, the matter of factness. Like, it's so simple to them. It's like, oh, he told me it was two. And it's like, oh.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, it just is. Like, and then there's this lightness to the heavy a lot when I see in shamanism, which I so appreciate. Maybe I resonate with. Where do people find Kenn and what he's doing? Because I think a lot of people are going to want to explore these if it resonates with them, especially in this new stuff you're doing.
Well, I do have a website called shamanstouch.com. And I do have a couple books out there already on various and sundry places, among them Amazon. So they can just do a search on KENNDAY. And I teach. I teach in Cincinnati. I'd love to go teach in Nashville. I have taught in Detroit, in Colorado, in Chicago. I've taught over in England and Germany. About 12 years ago, Patricia, my wife, said, you spend a lot of time out of town traveling, and you're a father now. So you need to spend some more time being a papa and being here. And so I stopped traveling. I stopped teaching outside of Cincinnati, and I promised her I wouldn't do more than 2 weekends a month, which, doesn't sound like a lot, but it backs up. So right now I'm really starting, and we're going on to our third workshop. There are 9 workshops in the basic series, and we're doing the third of those workshops in November. We just had one last weekend, getting that underway. And it's fascinating. I love my life. I love my work. I'm feel so blessed by my family and my friends and my students, the apprentices that I get to work with. It is a tremendous blessing. And I'm still kind of waking up to that and realizing, wow, my life is really incredible. And in spite of the difficulties that I've had in getting here, it has all been worth it. It continues to be worth it in every moment.
I think what I've learned a lot too is, part of that chosen, right, is, some would call it the wounded healer's journey, right? Where, there's specific things, to, move you through this physical realm of like almost that rebirth, right? We talked about multiple rebirths and how the people that are usually called to this have a lot of challenges in their life to get to where they are because they're big teachers. I've always thought that in my own life, like the harshness of my life, if people want to call that, have always been there to teach me something, right? To move me through.
Well, and
just for broken families or, all the hardships that have happened, and it's or deaths and things like that. And it's like part of that is part of that spot,
Yeah. It sensitizes you to a larger world, and it teaches you compassion. It teaches you the hard way, but it does teach you.
Well, and it also, I think there's a piece that I've learned from a lot of shamanic work is it's not for the light of heart either. It's a lot of it's work, right? It's not like, apprenticeship can happen for years and years. And it's not like, oh, I just go online and I take a course and I'm good, right? There's this dedication to the craft. Like you said, you are chosen. So there's something to that. And so I think there's this beautiful space that we have for that. So, wow, I think we probably need to schedule another one of these. I can't wait to just sit in community and in your workshops. It's something that I know will happen when it's supposed to. Maybe in Asheville here, or maybe somewhere in Cincinnati. It doesn't matter. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's just been a beautiful interaction of this ancient wisdom meets modern day world and this fusion of awakening for people, and in your way, in the way that you bring this to the world. So thank you so much for what you're doing, how you're doing it, and most importantly, the impact that you've had not only on me and people that I know, but also the world and what you're doing. So Kenn, go see him on shamanstouch.com. Go grab his book. It's a short read. It's a beautiful read.
And if you would like us to do a workshop series with Josh down there in Nashville.
Not Nashville. I'm not doing Nash Vegas.
Nashville. That's right.
The energy vortexes of the East. I are not doing Nashville. We are doing Nashville.
Which is all better after the storms, right?
Yes. I feel like I'm in Charlotte, but my true home and my calling is going towards there and the magic of that place. Beautiful. Yep.
All right. Well, there you go. Well, thank you very much, Josh. It's such a pleasure, and I look forward to working together.
Sounds good. Thank you, my friend. Aho.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me today on Beyond the Pills. If our mission to de-prescribe 10 million unnecessary medications resonates with you, share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review. Whether you're a practitioner or someone ready to reclaim your health, visit rx2wellness.com for free resources to begin your journey. Together, let's go beyond the pills and co-create a world of vibrant health and true healing. Until next time, live better and stay well.